The first thing I noticed when I opened the door to my supposedly private mountain cabin was the sound of someone quietly crying inside. I stood frozen on the porch, my suitcase beside me, staring at the warm light spilling through the curtains. I had won this weekend getaway at a charity auction in Colorado, paid for it honestly, and had been looking forward to 3 days away from the exhaustion of caring for my aging father. Yet when I finally stepped inside, a stranger was already living in my room. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can find its way into the darkest moments, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes one small act of compassion can change 2 lives at once. My name is Nathan, and I had driven nearly 6 hours from Kansas City to a quiet resort outside Breckenridge, Colorado. The charity auction had been organized by a local foundation that supported families facing financial hardship. I had bid almost impulsively, partly because I wanted to help and partly because I desperately needed a break. My father, Walter, had been struggling since my mother passed away, and I had spent the last year balancing work, hospital visits, groceries, bills, and the strange loneliness that comes when a house suddenly feels too large for one person. The cabin was beautiful, surrounded by pine trees and mountains dusted with early autumn snow. But the moment I entered, the peaceful image disappeared. A woman sat on the edge of the bedroom floor, clutching a small suitcase. She looked exhausted, not dangerous. Her name was Rebecca. She immediately apologized and explained that the resort manager had made a terrible mistake. Her reservation had been cancelled by the system, but someone at the charity office had apparently told her that the room was still available. She had nowhere else to go that night. My first reaction was anger. I had paid for the trip. I had worked for it. I had imagined sitting beside the fireplace with a book, sleeping late, and finally hearing my own thoughts again. I wanted to demand that she leave. But then I noticed something on the floor beside her suitcase, a worn photograph of an elderly man smiling beside a younger Rebecca. She quickly picked it up and held it against her chest. She explained that the man was her father, Thomas, who had recently passed away. Rebecca had come to Colorado because he had once promised to take her there, but illness had kept him from making the trip. She had decided to come alone because she couldn't bring herself to let the promise disappear completely. Unfortunately, the small amount of money she had saved was almost gone, and the reservation problem had left her stranded. Something inside me softened. I knew too well what it meant to carry a promise for someone who was no longer there. I called the resort office, expecting them to solve the problem. Instead, the manager admitted the mistake but said every other room was occupied because of a mountain festival. Rebecca would have to leave in the morning. I looked at her suitcase, then at the fireplace, and finally at the second bedroom that I hadn't even considered using. I told her she could stay there for the weekend. That decision changed everything. Over the next 2 days, Rebecca and I barely felt like strangers. We shared breakfast at the little kitchen table and walked through the mountain trails. She told me her father had repaired old clocks, and that she had learned patience by watching his hands work. I told her about Walter and how I sometimes felt guilty for resenting the responsibility of caring for him. Rebecca reminded me that exhaustion didn't mean lack of love. Sometimes, she said, love was simply tired. On the second evening, I received a call from home. Walter had fallen in the kitchen but was safe. I immediately started packing. Rebecca watched quietly as I folded my clothes, then handed me the photograph of her father. She said I didn't have to finish the trip just because I had paid for it. Some moments mattered more than money. I drove home through the night. Weeks later, I received a letter from the charity foundation. Rebecca had contacted them and told them what happened. She had also started volunteering with the same organization because she wanted to help people who felt forgotten during difficult seasons of their lives. The foundation offered me another weekend getaway, but I declined. Instead, I asked them to donate its value to a family in need. A few months later, Rebecca and I met again at a charity dinner. She had brought a small wooden clock made by her father. She gave it to me and said it belonged with someone who understood that time was not something we owned. It was something we were given. I placed that clock beside my father's chair at home. Walter smiled when he saw it, and for the first time in months, he asked me to tell him the whole story. Sometimes we think life is giving us exactly what we paid for. A vacation. A quiet room. A few peaceful days. But sometimes, the unexpected stranger standing in our way is actually the reason we were given the journey in the first place. If this story touched your heart, please support the video with a like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe so more stories of hope can reach people who need them. And before you go, leave a comment telling me this: if you were Nathan, would you have let Rebecca stay? Because kindness rarely arrives at a convenient time. Sometimes it arrives when we're tired, disappointed, and ready to close the door. And sometimes the greatest gift isn't the room we won, but the person we were meant to meet inside it.